I'm Lu Yan from Beijing Review Magazine, and this is the Governance Podcast, a podcast that explores the past, present, and future of governance in China as it works toward meeting its development goals and finds its place in the global community. 80 years ago, the Axis forces, led by Germany, Japan, and Italy, surrendered after a campaign of fascist imperialism that cost the world some 80 million lives. For China, the surrender brought an end to 18 years of invasion, subjugation, and ruthless violence. It also signified China's victory in its war of resistance against Japanese aggression and, more broadly, its victory as one of the major members of the Allied forces in World War II, also known in China as the World Anti-Fascist War. China held a grand gathering for the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Chinese People's War of Resistance against Japanese aggression and the World Anti-Fascist War in Beijing on September 3. President Xi Jinping said at the gathering, "The Chinese People's War of Resistance against Japanese aggression was an important part of the World Anti-Fascist War. With huge national sacrifice, the Chinese people made major contributions to saving human civilization and safeguarding world peace." In this episode of the Governance Podcast, we will talk to Wang Chaoguang, former director of the Institute of World History, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. He explained why China often refers to World War II as the World Anti-Fascist War and why victory over fascism should be commemorated 8 decades on. Wang's answers were in Chinese and have been dubbed into English. Wang Chaoguang, thank you for joining our podcast. Why do Chinese sources often refer to World War II as the World Anti-Fascist War? How are they different, and what is the relationship between the two?
China refers to World War II as the World Anti-Fascist War in recognition of its nature as a war primarily against the aggression of Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, militarist Japan, and others, forming the Axis powers commonly called the Fascist Camp. On the other side were countries including China, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States, forming the Allied powers, commonly called the Anti-Fascist Camp. The Axis powers launched aggressive wars of conquest, violating the sovereignty of the nations they invaded. In the process, they committed genocide, large-scale massacres of civilians, indiscriminate bombing of cities, the deployment of biological and chemical weapons, the forced conscription of laborers, and sexual slavery of women, the mistreatment of prisoners of war, and the other grave violations of fundamental human rights, humanitarian principles, and human dignity. These crimes against humanity flagrantly contravened international justice and law. They have been universally recognized as war crimes and were confirmed as such at the Nuremberg and Tokyo trials following the war. For these reasons, China honors the great victory of the World Anti-Fascist War as a triumph of justice over evil. Referring to World War II as the World Anti-Fascist War highlights its nature and origins and is a reminder of what was at stake in the conflict.
Many people around the world consider the war in China to be part of the Pacific Theater, not a separate theater. But actually, the Chinese people held ground in a main Eastern theater of the World Anti-Fascist War. Can you share on this topic?
The Eastern Theater of the World Anti-Fascist War mainly comprised 3 interconnected yet distinct theaters: the China Theater, the Southeast Asia Theater, and the Pacific Theater. Although together they form what is often called the Eastern Theater, each operated more or less separately in military terms. It is incorrect to regard the China Theater as part of the Pacific Theater. China was the first to resist fascist aggression, beginning in 1931. In other words, China was the earliest to recognize the global threat posed by fascist expansion and stand up against fascist aggression. China's resistance lasted the longest, from 1931 to 1945. During those 14 years, China tied down vast numbers of Japanese troops, as well as huge military, economic, and social resources that could otherwise have been deployed elsewhere. China's forces destroyed large numbers of Japanese troops. In doing so, China suffered enormous casualties and losses. The country also sent expeditionary units abroad to fight alongside the Allied forces, and provided other Allied nations with military and economic support. China supported the independence movements of colonized peoples, making a vital contribution to the post-war wave of decolonization and the rise of newly independent states. For instance, Korea established a provincial government in Shanghai in 1919 to resist Japanese colonial rule. Following the Japanese invasion of China, it was moved to Chongqing in the southwest. China played a key role in shaping the post-war international order centered on the United Nations. By becoming both a founding member of the UN and a permanent member of the UN Security Council, China's important status within the contribution to the anti-fascist allies were fully affirmed and highly praised at the time.
What lessons did the world learn from the World Anti-Fascist War, and what relevance do they continue to hold in today's world?
World War II brought tremendous sacrifices and heavy losses to humanity and the world. Reflecting on the past and taking history as a mirror, the international community has drawn ample lessons from this war, which remain of great relevance. At critical junctures in history, one should stand on the side of what is right. In brief, this means upholding humanity's shared values, promoting human rights, humanitarianism and human dignity, and safeguarding peace and development, so that people can live under the sunshine of peace rather than be trapped in the horrors of war. We must share historical and contemporary responsibilities, uphold justice and fairness, protect every country's right to equitable development, and promote progress among all nations. We must uphold the post-war international order. This order was won at great cost by humanity, still holds vital importance today, and must not be allowed to be dismantled, lest the world descend once more into chaos. We must resist hegemonic bullying by a few states, whether political, economic, cultural, or otherwise. Such bullying undermines the equal right of all peoples to develop. In light of the lessons of World War II, this warning ought to resonate ever more strongly.
Since 1840, the year that marked the beginning of a century of turmoil, national rejuvenation has been the greatest dream of the Chinese people. President Xi's vision for national rejuvenation by the middle of this century is a reflection of that dream. The plan extends beyond the nation's own revival to include the building of a community with a shared future for humanity, an open, inclusive, clean, and beautiful world that enjoys lasting peace, universal security, and common prosperity. Its position as a main center and the longest-running battlefield in the World Anti-Fascist War, as well as its central role in the formation of the United Nations, have forged in China a strong will to foster a global commitment to avoiding the mistakes of the past. Throughout this series, we'll be exploring topics related to President Xi and how governance is practiced in China. To stay up to date on the podcasts, visit the Beijing Review website, bjreview.com. Find us on YouTube or Spotify with the tag Beijing Review, or look for us where you get your podcasts. I'm Lu Yan in Beijing. Thanks for listening to the Governance Podcast. Bye for now.